welcome along to the first in a new series where Property Tribes is delighted to be partnering with Paragon Bank to bring you a regional surveyor monthly market update. I'm so excited. And as always at Property Tribes, we advocate that local knowledge is key for de-risking any investment in property. So it's great that throughout this series, we're going to be hearing from local surveyors who can bring us really granular detail on what is happening in their area. And for the debut instalment, we're focusing on the thriving town of Norwich and its surrounds. And I'm joined on this call by Vicky Colson, who is a regional surveyor, and Sam Debenham, who is regional sales manager for East Anglia. So welcome, guys. Thank you for joining me on the debut edition. And it's just such an exciting time to be starting with this content, because the property market's just kind of burst out of the trap since the end of lockdown, and we're hearing of both the rental market and the sales market being, you know, really on fire and breaking new records. Vicky, if I could come to you first, I was wondering, is that the case in Norwich?
Certainly it's the case as far as I've experienced in Norwich. Across the city, it's a very active market on the buy-to-let scene. I mean, there are different styles of properties, obviously, that, you know, attract different types of tenants and things, but not just Norwich. I mean, some of the wider hinterland as well, sort of going out towards the coast, Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft. So, yeah, sure.
Well, we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go through the call, because I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities in Norwich, and we hopefully touch on some of those. Sam, coming to you now, what strategies do you think work well in Norwich and the environs, and why?
Only talking from personal experience, really, through the brokers that I deal with, not necessarily just in Norwich, but all my brokers across the East Anglia region. I'd say the kind of the biggest thing that we notice in Norwich are the HMOs, particularly to do with, because of the fact that the city's got two universities that are both fairly central. Also the hospital, which obviously caters for the HMO professional market as well. So with us as being a specialist lender, obviously that's a lot of what we do anyway. But yeah, in terms of what I noticed since being with Paragon, that's kind of what draws landlords to Norwich, which with it being HMOs obviously attracts those bigger yields as well, which obviously is what everyone's chasing. Yeah, so for sure that would be it.
Yeah, I think there's something like 13% of the population of Norwich are students, so it does show that there's a very high demand for that. What about single occupancy buy-to-let? And you also obviously have some really nice coastal towns as well, which may suit holiday lets. Do you see that activity as well, guys?
Certainly the single ASTs, there's plenty of demand across the city. There's also just sort of carrying on from what Sam was saying, it's not just the student market, so you have got sort of young professionals. It's a very young and vibrant city, so what you tend to find is that as the students graduate and they get jobs and they stay locally, they're still quite keen to sort of participate in co-living, really, because for all sorts of reasons. So there's the demand from the young professionals as well, if you like. Sort of going out to the coastal towns, there are sort of across the Norfolk Broads, of course, you've got the sort of holiday let type of properties. But what I look at a lot of properties in Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft are the sort of old Edwardian villas, seaside, sea frontage type places that have had a sort of a history of uses throughout their life, really, from sort of you know, Edwardian villas or Victorian villas as they were built for the people coming to holiday there, and then sort of moving on to sort of care homes, and then moving on again, and now I'm seeing them as converted to HMOs. So there is quite a demand in the area in the coastal towns. Again, different sort of demographic, really, for your occupants. You know, your tenants are different tenant profile. So across the board, plenty of demand for HMOs, really. Yeah.
I think one of the trends that we've seen in perhaps other bigger cities is kind of an exodus of people leaving the cities. You know, their priorities have been changed by by lockdown. They're looking for, maybe more outdoor space, or they can work from home now, so they don't need to be located so much in a city centre. Have you noticed any of that kind of trend, Sam, or are the kind of young professionals, and obviously you've got your students aren't really going to be affected by such things, are they? So what's happened kind of post-COVID, it hasn't really impacted Norwich?
I wouldn't say that has at all. I think with Norwich, because you've got, like Vicky says, it's not necessarily like it's just a student city and it just attracts student HMOs. You've got like the University of East Anglia and the hospital are all within a close proximity. So I guess the brokers that I was talking to, even throughout the times where COVID was at its worst and student lets were vacant, the borrowers weren't that affected because there was still the adequate demand to then switch it to a professional let, which we're equally is okay with. So I think from that perspective, that's where Norwich has obviously done very well. And in the other part of your question around residential owners looking to upsize and chase more land and have outbuildings to work from home and all those things, I think one thing that I've noticed, and I'm sure people in my role of different banks have probably noticed the same thing, we do a lot of limited company lending, and where they might have their family home but decide that they want to buy something bigger that's perhaps not so central. What we're finding is that a lot of new landlords are looking to sell their home, put it into a limited company, turn it into a buy-to-let, take their equity and put it into a bigger place as well. So I've noticed a lot of that over the sort of past 6 to 9 months, which of course is partly accelerated because of the stamp duty holiday as well. But yeah, for sure, definitely.
Well, obviously very savvy in Norwich. That's exactly how I got started in buy-to-let. I think 18 years ago now, I rented out my flat in London, took an equity release when I transferred it to a buy-to-let mortgage, and then bought my home down in Guildford. But I think that sounds, Sam, like a real testament to the strength of the Norwich market, that it wasn't really affected by COVID lockdown and all the other stuff surrounding the pandemic, and that landlords had options if the particular strategy that they were working within was struggling a little bit. They had somewhere else to go. So I think that is very telling, to the strength of the market. Now, I did mention at the beginning that with you guys, with your local, on the ground knowledge, that we could actually dive down to a granular level on these calls. Where would you say are the best locations for buy-to-let at the moment? Can you specify any particular areas or postcodes that landlords interested in Norwich should consider looking at?
Across the city, as I said before, there are different tenant profiles for different styles of properties, and I think from Paragon's point of view, we're very keen not to redline any areas to sort of say, oh, we're not lending in that area, because we will look at anything. We'll look at everything on its merits. So I think that's kind of quite important for landlords to understand, is that, we don't blanket cover, say, oh, we're not lending in that particular NR postcode area. But equally, it's important, I would say, for the landlords to know their areas. Don't go in and buy blind, because obviously, whilst we don't redline an area, there may be certain aspects about a property, or even, you can't sort of be so specific as to include a whole postcode area, but there might be a particular end of a particular street that's got a reputation. So, that might be something that we would know on a local level. But if you're buying off at an auction or not necessarily familiar with the area, you could get caught out, really. So I think it's important to know your local area, but there isn't anywhere we would say we wouldn't lend on. Equally, I wouldn't want to sort of definitely say, well, that's a fantastic area to go in, because there's always good bits and bad bits. But certainly those areas, if you're looking for a student let, those areas are around the sort of UEA, University of East Anglia. There's a big sort of area around there that were a lot of 1950s ex-council houses, well built, good size, plenty of space. And they're all let out as small HMOs, the sort of ground floor living rooms converted to a bedroom, 3 upstairs bedrooms. So they're four person HMOs, really, so they haven't got problems with the license, and they let out, every day of the week, really, because and you can sign them up for a year in advance as well. So I think that's quite important for landlords to know that they've got them let out for the full academic year. So anywhere around the university, and as Sam says, there are 2 universities in Norwich. I've sort of mentioned UEA there. The Norwich University of the Arts is more central. So
Similar trends, I guess. I'm being more referred quite a few new build flats in the city. I generally don't see a huge amount of big HMOs in Norwich. Obviously there are, but I'd say that I would definitely echo Vicky's point around most of the HMOs that we see in the city, or that I get referred, are more of like a 4 or 5 bed occupancy rather than like your over 6 sharers. But Vicky mentioned it earlier. I do get a lot of referrals for things for properties in like your lower stuff and your Great Yarmouth, so more like your coastal regions. Particularly, I get quite a few in the way of like multiple units under the same freehold. Certainly, like Vicky mentioned, that the property type there, where they've had lots of different uses over the years, and some of the ones I'm particularly seeing are ones where they've converted, the big perhaps terraced house into 2 or 3 flats under the same title. I guess what you get with Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft is Golden Triangle's great. It's obviously very desirable. Properties are sold very, very quick, attracts all type of tenants, sell quick, let quick, which is great. And it's obviously exactly what landlords are after. But I guess with Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft, the house prices are that little bit cheaper. And if you can still take advantage of the same yields, then everyone's winning. But I guess one thing that we're very big on is that we do want sort of hands-on landlords, really, that you're not going into something blind, that you're not perhaps from the London areas and perhaps don't know too much about where you're buying, because the yields speak for themselves, and obviously that's what everyone's after. Then equally, without realizing, you could be buying in a location that is a little bit hit and miss, so to speak. So there's no red tape areas, but every city has the same, doesn't it? They have areas that perhaps you would avoid, but definitely.
Well, I mean, at Property Tribes, we always advocate that if you are buying away from the area that that you do need to undertake, intense due diligence. And I think, the resource that we're creating between Property Tribes and Paragon is hopefully going to build into a series of different area guides, so we can really provide some free educational resources for landlords between us to help them see where the opportunities are. I'm quite interested, guys, to just, we talk about obviously HMOs, student HMOs, and then we're also hearing increasingly co-living, which is a trend that I became aware of probably about 2.5 years ago. How do you determine the difference between the two, or are they really one and the same?
Well, I think it's the tenant profile really would be the difference, because you've got your young working professionals, so they're in full-time employment. So from the landlord's point of view, a lot of the students, you'll get them signed up, they'll probably have a guarantor as a parent guarantor a lot of the time. So landlords take some comfort from that. Your co-living, if you've got your young professionals, I mean, I've seen a lot of co-living in one of the other cities that I cover, in sort of Cambridge area, where you've got sort of young professionals with the science part. But I do see that sort of out in Norwich to a lesser extent, but you know, I think you get it where you've got a big employer sort of that's employing a young demographic, really. So and given that Norwich is now, you know, quite a young city, I am seeing more of that. They tend to expect a bit more. So your property tends to need to be, you know, they'll want ensuite rooms, they'll want a nice kitchen. They'll often want now, well, what I've been seeing is they want a big room because they're probably working home from in a corner of the room at the moment. So those sort of those co-living areas have been expanding. I think maybe we're just sort of having a little bit of a hiccup over the COVID thing, but I think it will come back on because of generally getting onto the housing ladder. So I think the demand's there.
I don't know whether you agree, Sam, but also I think co-living has a kind of community element around it. So it's much more community orientated, and I think landlords that recognise that and help facilitate that will do well.
Yeah, for sure. I think Vicky sort of hit the nail on the head, really. Haven't got a great deal to add, but not seeing a huge amount of it. But I think, absolutely right. There is that perhaps community element to it. So whether we see more, I'm sure we will.
Where they've got some nice, good space as well as their room. You know, a communal room, a big kitchen living space. It does tend to sort of, it will let out better. You know, if you've got that facility to provide, and nice and modern and you know, sharp, and that's what they want.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely the way it's going. So we've kind of talked about student accommodation, HMOs for young professionals, you know, seeing a little bit of the co-living coming through, but you know, what about standard occupancy buy-to-let? We've discussed that is good in the area. What sort of yields would you achieve just standard single occupancy buy-to-let, and what sort of properties would you recommend? Is it still your 2 and 3 bed kind of terraced or family homes?
Around here, definitely. I guess I see less of. I don't see as many like big family homes. Certainly, well, big family homes kind of outside of Norwich, more in like the rural areas where house prices are quite more expensive, and perhaps the yield isn't so good, and perhaps it wouldn't necessarily stack up as well than if you were in more of a central location with like a 2 up, 2 down element to it. And I think with those types of properties, they appeal more to like an owner occupier rather than a tenant paying, you know, that amount of rental income. But I guess more so if those rural locations kind of outside of Norwich going to the coastal regions, as Vicky mentioned, it's probably where we see more of the holiday let market rather than like a standard AST, so to speak.
I've seen quite a few buy-to-lets on modern developments, just your standard AST on a, you know, on because you've got like a lot of cities on the edge, the sort of around the ring road, you've got a lot of your sort of modern expansion developments that's been going on over the last 10 to 15 years and is continuing. So I do see your sort of standard ASTs on those. Because of the house prices and the rentals, it's obviously the yield isn't going to be as lucrative as an HMO, but you're not going to have the headache of the same kind of, you know, management and things like that. So it's you pay your money, takes your choice a little bit really with that. No,
definitely it's the same really for anywhere in the UK, isn't it? It's kind of high risk, high reward, or low risk, low reward, and it's really up to the landlord to determine what's right for them. But certainly starting out, I would always recommend just start with a 2 or 3 bedroomed family home, terrace property in a good area, in a good school catchment area, close to good transport links, and where you're going to get family tenants that want to put down roots and put their children through the local schools. So, that's pretty universal, and I'm sure there are opportunities to do so. And I'm quite a fan of new build as well. And we've seen a lot of infrastructure going into the Norwich area over the last 15 years or so, both in terms of the road improvements and obviously train to London. That's kind of improved as well.
The duelling of the A11 event that finally happened. The Norwich has opened up tremendously in the last 15 years, and I think it will continue to grow as an area because it's very well placed for the coast, the Broads. The city itself is vibrant. There's plenty when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. There's plenty going on there. It's got its a couple of theatres, big music scene. It's the European City of Creative Writing. It's got a lot going on. So people want to go to Norwich. They want to come to Norwich and set up. Start living their lives there.
What you get with Norwich is you do have that. It has got everything that you kind of need and want in a city, and I think what helps with that massively is that if you compare it as you get closer to London, what the house prices are and what the rental income is, it's obviously far more reasonable. So in terms of jobs, there's obviously a huge supply of jobs, but equally just from a personal level, you've got so many surrounding areas and small towns, small villages, more rural locations around Norwich, where Norwich is the closest city. So you're always going to attract those people, aren't you? Not necessarily just for living, but economy and the shopping and so on and so forth. So I think that's a fair point. Also, the other thing I was going to say about single occupancy, what I'm certainly seeing a lot of, and I know probably Vicky will echo that, is that we're seeing a lot of landlords wanting to buy the single occupancy homes that perhaps have been lived in for a lot of years, that are a little tired and haven't necessarily been given a lot of love over the years, and landlords are seeing that as a good opportunity to buy properties that are a little bit cheaper, where they can go in there and you just improve the quality and give it a bit of a cosmetic uplift and benefit then from if they've taken perhaps bridging finance or been fortunate enough to pay for it cash, then can remortgage over to someone like Paragon, who perhaps will lend against that new value, which gives them the opportunity to take out that additional equity and go on to the next project. So I would say single occupancies going, that's what I see the most of. And I can't stress enough, not just in Norwich, Great Yarmouth, Lowestoft, Dereham, Watton, all those kind of areas, we see quite a bit of that as well.
Well, that's really interesting to know, especially as we are in a rising market, and if we recall those glory days of homes under the hammer, how many people refurb property, and then at the end Sarah Beanie said, well, actually they got the uplift because they were helped by a rising market. So it seems that there's that kind of opportunity in Norwich at the moment as well, to really force the capital appreciation through the refurbishment, but also benefit from a really hot rising market. And I think that's a brilliant strategy, Sam, and it's what I really recommend that people do in the current conditions. And it works in any conditions, actually, because if there isn't capital appreciation, you can still force it through the refurbishment or the development. We're just winding up to the end now. I was just interested really to talk a little bit about holiday lets, because as you mentioned, you've got this very vibrant city centre with lots of amenities and lots of culture and lots of things going on, which is great for short-term lets. And then of course you've got the coastal towns as well, which are more kind of resort based, more your traditional seasidey town. And I'm a massive fan of holiday lets. I think they're going to have a golden era going forward, for obvious reasons, because people are going to be holidaying at home a lot in the years to come. What's your views on holiday lets in the Norwich area? I don't know if Paragon have actual holiday let mortgages, if they offer those.
At the moment, no, but we stopped doing it at the beginning of the pandemic for obvious reasons. And yeah, we're not quite there yet, but it should be hopefully fairly imminent that we will be returning to that market. Hopefully the not so distant future. But ordinarily, prior to the world we're in, then yeah, we were lending on holiday lets as normal.
Yeah. It just sounds that sounds like there is so much opportunity for landlords in Norwich, multiple different strategies to consider, wherever they are on their landlord journey, that there'll be something that they can achieve in the city. Would you agree, Vicky?
I think that's a very fair assessment, really. Yeah, there is a lot of choice out there. There's a lot of different types of tenant profile. So, if you're a landlord that specifically wants to build up their portfolio with students, then Norwich is your place. Or if you want to build them up with working professionals or single ASTs. So, and it's not a huge city, but it's big enough. So it's a nice feel to it. You haven't got some of the problems that you might have in some of the larger centres like London or Birmingham or Manchester, where you've got sort of, maybe you might have certain no-go areas, but that's not really the case in Norwich, and it's quite an accessible city to get to know. So I think it's definitely worth a look, really.
Yeah, I think you can build a portfolio there, start off with your single occupancy buy-to-lets, and then as you gain more experience, perhaps move up to HMOs and a few holiday lets, and you can build and diversify your portfolio within quite a relatively small area. And I think that is an interesting and attractive proposition to landlords. So as we close this out, guys, could I ask you each, just going to put you on the spot here, if we've got landlords watching who don't really know Norwich area very well, but we spark their interest in investing there, would you each be able to give them a couple of top tips that you think would help them with their decision making about getting involved in the Norwich property market?
I would say visit the place.
Yeah.
Number one. Also, just familiarise yourself with any kind of local construction styles. Sometimes you find that there are one or two peculiarities in new areas. So it's not, you get a bit of clay lump around Norwich and things like that. So it's just to be aware that there are certain localised construction types. On the whole, they're all pretty traditional, really. Familiarising yourself with the employers, who are the big employers, that kind of thing. You've got sort of the ones in the city we've discussed, but you've also got sort of out on the coast, you've got there's a big offshore wind farm, so you've actually got quite a lot of people who are there on temporary contracts, but they may just be looking for something Monday to Friday. So there are those sorts of things, but again, these are the things that when you get to know an area, when you live there and you know it, you know it. Whereas if you're coming into an area, you might not think, oh, there's a whole market there I could tap into because of that particular employer. So that I would say those are my top tips, really.
Excellent. What about you, Sam?
I think you mentioned it earlier with encouraging landlords who perhaps don't live in the area to ensure that they do their homework, and I think that would probably be my biggest one, really. I think, and that's something that's important to us from an underwriting perspective when assessing the ability of the landlord and the risk of lending. And I think that where we are I feel like I'm very fortunate to be based where I'm based, where there's so much opportunity in East Anglia with all sorts of property. We've discussed so many different elements of, your refurbishment projects and your HMOs for students, your HMOs for land professionals. Sorry, you've got your multi units on the coastals, you've got your holiday lets on the coastals. There's so much in the way of opportunity, and I think I'm definitely seeing an uplift in all those types of inquiries from landlords that live outside of East Anglia. And I think from our point of view, we're always looking for those landlords that have got that hands-on approach, who have done their homework, know where they're buying, know what their market is. If they are looking for a HMO, what type of demand is there in that area? Are they targeting students because it's close to the University of Arts or the University of East Anglia, or are they going for that professional market on perhaps the outskirts of the city? So I think that's probably the biggest one, really. I think, like I say, we're very, very fortunate to be where I am, and I'll probably take it for granted because I've lived in the area all my life. So obviously know the market or know the area well on a personal level, and I think that would be my biggest thing, really. But equally, You know, that's why these landlords pay their brokers who have got years of experience and contacts within the industry, where perhaps they have, you know, landlords have got that loophole or have got that slight lack of knowledge. That's why they pay their broker to sort of handhold and guide them through that process and ensure that they're taking them to the right lender. And I think that's important as well.
And I think your liaison with your brokers, though, Sam, on that, I think is really important for us as the bank, because you can then come to me straight away. You know, if a broker's got a problem or a query, he might bring it to you, you might bring it to me, and we can discuss a query before it's even gone to application, really. So, you know, we do have this sort of referral process that we can sort of utilise and get back to the brokers as quickly. So I think that's quite a useful thing for landlords, because obviously it'll help them make an early decision. And equally, it's quite useful for us, because if it's something that we know straight away it's going to be a no, then, you know, we're not sort of getting 3/4 of the way down an application before we suddenly realise that it's not going to go anywhere. So
yeah, absolutely. And that's yes, in the role that I do, where, you know, obviously from my point of view, I need to build trust with brokers and make them feel confident when using Paragon and recommending their sort of long-term clients to us, and having that process of referring properties to Vicky and the other guys at the rest of the UK. Such a useful tool for everyone, really, because we're all busy people. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're the client or the landlord, the broker or Vicky or me. No one wants to waste time. No one's got time to waste. And I think that, say to brokers all the time, I don't care how many referrals I do a month. Like, if you've got particular concerns about the rental demand or around the condition of the property or whatever it might be, get it over to us. Get us to have a look at it before you start spending money and time on something that perhaps is going to fall down at the first hurdle. And yeah, it's something that we're very big on, sort of advertising before lenders go to that. Before clients go to the application stage.
I think one just other thing I would add about the something for the landlords to check is just check the planning position of the property that they're interested in, because if it might need a specific type of planning consent, and if it hasn't got it, then that's going to be a problem for a lender. So we do see that sometimes, and particularly if they've bought a property at auction and it seemed like a fantastic opportunity. You know, one of the things, it's the old adage, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. So just due diligence, as you say.
And on top of that would be the compliance around the HMOs as well. Has it got everything it needs with
licensing,
whether it's the licensing or if it's got over 6 years, has it got the sui generis planning, has it got the correct fire extinguishers and fire doors and so on and so forth? Because we certainly get a lot of referrals where landlords are trying to perhaps convert the wrong thing to the wrong property, and they're trying to convert this family home that's in an area that's not really HMO based. And actually, if we send a surveyor around there, they're going to see a family home. Well, we're not going to really see the HMO demand in that. So I think that's something to do your homework on what the council are after as well.
Well, absolutely awesome advice from both of you. Thank you so much for joining me on this inaugural regional surveyor monthly market update, Property Tribes cross Paragon, our content collaboration. I think it's got off to a brilliant start, and you know, I've learned so much just listening to you two as well. And I think this is really going to be the strength of the collaboration going forwards, that we've got people such as yourselves with such in-depth knowledge of the local area and have got so many useful tips and insights to share. So thank you both very much for joining me. And also, you know, it's so great that Property Tribes is working with Paragon in this format, because we're working together to help educate landlords. And I know from what you've been saying that those are the type of landlords that you like to see you know, coming across to Paragon for finance. So I think it's been a great start, and I hope you've enjoyed the chat as well.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
We're going to continue on with the series, but for now it's goodbye from Vicky, Sam and myself, and we do hope you've enjoyed this first ever Surveyors Report in association with Paragon.